The antique shop was a labyrinth of forgotten treasures, a dusty haven for collectors and dreamers. I, a writer with a penchant for the peculiar, frequented such places, always hoping to stumble upon a story waiting to be told. This time, my attention was drawn to a small, unassuming music box tucked away in a dark corner. It was made of dark, polished wood, intricately carved with scenes of a pastoral landscape. Something about it resonated with me, a sense of melancholy and forgotten beauty. The shop owner, a wizened old man with eyes that seemed to hold centuries of stories, told me little about the box's origins. He'd acquired it from an estate sale, he said, and knew nothing of its history. Intrigued, I purchased it, eager to explore its secrets. Back in my quiet study, I examined the music box more closely. The carvings were exquisite, depicting shepherds tending their flocks, villagers dancing in a meadow, and a grand manor house nestled amongst rolling hills. There was an air of idyllic tranquility about the scenes, a sense of a long-lost golden age. I wound the key and a delicate melody filled the room. It was a haunting tune, both beautiful and melancholic, with a hint of something unsettling lurking beneath the surface. As the music played, I found myself drawn into the carvings, my imagination conjuring images of the scenes depicted on the box. That night I dreamt of the pastoral landscape. I was there, walking through the meadow, listening to the laughter of the villagers. The sun was warm on my skin, the air filled with the scent of wildflowers. It was a perfect, idyllic world. But as I wandered closer to the manor house, a sense of unease began to creep over me. The laughter faded, replaced by an unsettling silence. The sun seemed to dim, casting long, ominous shadows. I woke with a start, the melody of the music box still echoing in my mind. I dismissed the dream as just a dream, but the next night, the dream returned, even more vivid than before. This time, I ventured inside the manor house. It was grand and opulent, but there was a coldness to it, an emptiness that chilled me to the bone. I wandered through the silent halls, feeling a presence, something unseen but undeniably there. And then I saw her, a figure standing in the shadows, her face obscured, her presence radiating sorrow and despair. She didn't speak, didn't move. She simply stood there, a silent specter in the grand empty house. A wave of fear washed over me. I turned and fled, desperate to escape the chilling presence. I woke again, my heart pounding in my chest, the melody of the music box now sounding more mournful than ever. I realized that the music box was more than just an antique. It was a conduit, a gateway to something else, something dark and unsettling. I tried to ignore it, to put the dreams out of my mind, but the music box seemed to exert a strange influence over me, drawing me back to it. I found myself playing the melody over and over again, each time feeling more drawn into its spell. The dreams continued, each one more terrifying than the last, revealing more of the manor's dark secrets, the tragic story of the woman who haunted its halls. I learned that she had been the lady of the manor, a young woman who had suffered a terrible tragedy, a loss so profound that it shattered her spirit. Her sorrow seeped into the very walls of the house, binding her essence to the music box that had once been her solace. The melody, haunting yet beautiful, carried the weight of her despair, and with each note, I felt her grief wrap around me like a ghostly embrace. I knew I had to sever the connection, to free myself from the music box's eerie influence. I tried to destroy it, to smash it into fragments, but something held me back. A strange, unshakable sense of empathy for the woman whose sorrow was trapped within its melody. It was as if the music box itself resisted, pleading silently for understanding rather than destruction. Instead, I made a different choice. I returned it to the antique shop, hoping that someone more attuned to its history could unlock its secrets and perhaps bring peace to the lost soul imprisoned within. I placed it on the counter before the old shop owner, telling him nothing of my experiences. Yet, When he looked at me, his gaze was knowing, as if he understood more than I was willing to admit. There was no need for words. He simply nodded and took the music box into his hands, his fingers brushing over its surface with a quiet reverence. I never returned to that shop, and I never heard the music box's melody again. But the memory of the woman in the manor, her sorrowful presence, still lingers in the corners of my mind. It was a lesson, a reminder that some objects hold more than just memories. They carry echoes of the past, whispers of tragedy, and the lingering presence of those who refuse to be forgotten. My uncle moved to America years ago, leaving behind his old farmhouse. Before he left, he handed me the keys and said, "You can go there any time, but whatever you do, don't open the door to the basement room." I laughed it off at the time, but the way he said it stuck with me. It wasn't a joke, it was a warning. Months later, my friends and I decided to take a trip to the farmhouse. It was deep in the countryside, surrounded by fields and dense trees. The drive there was long and winding, and by the time we arrived, the sun was already setting. The house stood alone, its old wooden exterior faded and the roof sagging in places. It had an eerie charm, like something from an old horror movie. Inside, the house smelled of dust and damp wood. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of something old and forgotten. My friends Jake, Sam, and Emily immediately began exploring, laughing as they kicked up dust. The furniture was covered with white sheets and the floors creaked under every step. We settled in for the night, lighting candles and telling stories. The power was out, which made everything feel even creepier. As we sat in the living room, Jake brought up my uncle's warning. "So, what's the deal with that basement room?" he asked, grinning. "Think he left a treasure chest down there?" "More like a pile of junk," I shrugged. "But he did seem serious about not opening it." "Which means we have to open it," Emily said, her eyes gleaming mischievously. I hesitated. The thought of that door, standing there, locked and untouched for years, sent a shiver down my spine. But curiosity got the best of us. We grabbed a flashlight and headed down to the basement. The stairs groaned under our weight as we descended into the darkness. The basement was colder than the rest of the house, and the air was thick with mildew. The door stood at the far end of the room, its wood warped with age. A rusty padlock secured it, but luck was on our side. We found an old iron key in one of the kitchen drawers. With a deep breath, I turned the key. The lock clicked open with an unsettling ease. The door creaked as it swung inward, revealing a pitch-black room. The air was ice cold, and a putrid smell hit us instantly. I shone the flashlight inside. At first it seemed empty, just old furniture covered in dusty sheets. Then we saw it. A figure stood in the corner. At first we thought it was a mannequin, maybe an old coat rack covered in a sheet, but then it moved. The sheet shifted slightly, like someone breathing beneath it. A long, slow exhale filled the room. The flashlight flickered. Jake stepped back, bumping into me. "What the hell?" The sheet dropped to the floor. The thing beneath it was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs too long and fingers that curled unnaturally. Its face was pale and sunken, hollow black eyes staring at us. A grotesque grin stretched across its face as it took a step forward. The door slammed shut behind us. Emily screamed and Sam yanked at the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. The creature tilted its head, jerking forward in unnatural movements. The air around us felt thick, suffocating. My heart pounded as the flashlight flickered wildly, casting erratic shadows across the room. Then, the whisper came. I don't remember much after that. I remember falling, the room spinning, a cold hand brushing against my shoulder. And then, darkness. The next thing I knew, we were outside, gasping for air. The farmhouse loomed behind us, dark and silent. The basement door was locked again, as if we had never touched it. None of us spoke on the drive home. No one wanted to acknowledge what had happened. But the nightmares started that night. I would wake up drenched in sweat, the sound of that whisper still ringing in my ears. A week later, I called my uncle. "You opened it, didn't you?" he said, his voice quiet. "What was that thing?" I whispered. He sighed. "Something that should have never been woken up." I hung up without another word. We never went back. The lighthouse stood sentinel against the tempestuous sea, a gaunt gray finger pointing accusingly at the heavens. Locals whispered tales of shipwrecks, lost souls, and a spectral keeper forever bound to its lonely vigil. As a maritime historian, I was captivated by its dark allure, drawn to the whispers of tragedy and the mysteries shrouded in its weathered stones. Armed with my camera, a notebook, and a healthy dose of skepticism, I secured permission for an overnight stay, determined to unravel the truth behind the legends. Silas, the lighthouse's grizzled old caretaker, greeted me with a knowing look and a litany of chilling anecdotes. He spoke of disembodied whispers echoing through the tower, icy drafts that snaked through the corridors, and the unnerving sensation of being watched by unseen eyes. I listened patiently, attributing his tales to the isolation and folklore that clung to the place like sea mist. Yet, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and ominous gray, a prickle of unease began to crawl up my spine. The ascent up the winding staircase was a journey into the past. Each step echoed in the cavernous tower, the silence broken only by the rhythmic creaking of the ancient metal steps. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp stone, salt, and something indefinable, something that hinted at decay and forgotten things. The lantern room, a vast, circular chamber at the tower's peak, was a cathedral of glass and gleaming brass. The massive Fresnel lens, a giant unblinking eye, seemed to scrutinize my every move, its multifaceted surface reflecting the deepening darkness outside. Setting up my makeshift camp, a sleeping bag, a few provisions, and my research materials, I tried to focus on my work. I spread out old logbooks, charts, and maritime records, eager to delve into the lighthouse's history, but the silence, so profound it pressed on my eardrums, it was a silence that seemed to hold its breath, anticipating something. The rhythmic crashing of the waves against the rocks below, usually a comforting sound, now seemed like the restless sighs of the sea, a constant reminder of its power and its capacity for destruction. As darkness enveloped the tower, the lighthouse beam began its tireless sweep across the inky expanse, a solitary finger of light piercing the gloom. I tried to ignore the growing unease, to rationalize the strange sensations, but the feeling of being watched intensified. It was a palpable presence, a weight in the air, as if I were not alone. Then I heard it, a whisper, faint and ethereal, seemingly emanating from the very walls themselves. It was a low, mournful sound, like a sigh carried on the wind. My heart pounded in my chest. I strained my ears, trying to decipher the words, but it was just a whisper, a breath of sound that chilled me to the bone. I grabbed my flashlight, its beam trembling in my hand, and cautiously moved towards the source of the sound. The light danced across the damp stone walls, illuminating nothing but shadows and the glint of moisture. The whisper came again, closer this time, and I felt a sudden drop in temperature, as if an icy hand had reached out and touched me. A cold draft snaked through the room, chilling me to the core. And then I saw it, a flicker of movement in the periphery of my vision. I swung my flashlight around, the beam landing on it, a figure. Translucent, shimmering, like smoke coalescing into human form. It was a man, dressed in the tattered remnants of a sailor's uniform, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes hollow and filled with an immeasurable sadness. He was staring out at the sea, his gaze fixed on the turbulent waves, his expression one of eternal longing. A gasp escaped my lips. I stumbled back, my flashlight clattering to the floor, plunging the room into near darkness. I scrambled back, fumbling for the staircase, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I didn't look back. I fled down the winding stairs. The image of the ghostly sailor burned into my mind, his sorrowful eyes haunting my every step. I didn't stop running until I reached the shore, the cold night air a welcome relief, the vast expanse of the sea suddenly seeming less terrifying than the ghostly presence I had encountered. I never returned to the lighthouse. And even now, years later, the memory of that night lingers, a chilling reminder of the mysteries that lie hidden in the shadows.